Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I don't suppose this rises to the level of the Cornhusker kickback or the Louisiana Purchase. But for us to have received roughly an hour, if not less, notice about this conference, to receive an amendment that is core to this entire legislation, how you pay for it, and to receive that at 3 minutes after the conference was reconvened, on an amendment that I believe is fundamentally deceptive to the American people, is fundamentally unfair. I don't understand, again, how pots of money can be used for two different purposes. I've heard the distinguished chairman of the banking committee staffer say that CBO has said this and CBO has said that. They're good people at CBO. They score what you put before them. If you don't put before them that you're going to use the same pot of money for two different purposes, well, that might alter the score. And I've heard CBO discussed. I haven't seen an official score from CBO in this new proposal. So if one exists, I would hope that someone would make it available to those who are conferees. Now, I've heard the chairman of the Senate Banking Committee said, well, this will end TARP. Well, I guess it's a tacit admission that TARP shouldn't have been extended in the first place. Myself, a number of us have had legislation that would have terminated TARP long ago. But number one, I'm not really sure this terminates TARP. Again, we have existent programs. It doesn't say they're going to end the funding. It just says you can't add new programs. And with respect to bringing the ceiling down, there's still language in the underlying bill that says as long as the Secretary of Treasury can get the Fed chairman to agree with him that he's got some very important purpose, well, all of a sudden, he can go back up, raise the cap. I don't see this terminating the TARP program. But more important than that, the American people were told this money was going to be used to reduce the deficit. A deficit that has increased almost tenfold in the last 2 years, that has contributed to the largest debt in the history of America, where now we're at a tipping point of having our debt be 90% of our economy. Greece is about 113%. They're having to sell sovereign territory to pay their debt. And here we are taking money away from the TARP funds. I don't understand it, and telling the American people that somehow by magic it's going to be used for two purposes. And now the DIF. You know, these are funds, already we know that the deposit insurance fund is stressed. So on the one hand, we say we're going to add to the deposit insurance fund. This needs to be done. This is important to shore up, show signs of strength. But on the other hand, I've got at least an earlier CBO letter that says this legislation is going to increase direct spending by $26.9 billion. And so we're going to use that revenue for a pay-for, which, by the way, in this Congress, is obviously the pay-for is the last thing anybody ever thinks about here. It's kind of the afterthought. So we're going to use it to shore up the fund, but we're going to use it as a pay-for. You know, isn't it interesting that we're writing into this bill an office that supposedly is going to root out abusive, unfair, and deceptive financial practices, which is exactly what this pay-for is. The very first thing that this CFPB ought to do is outlaw this funding practice. It is unfair, it is abusive, it is deceptive. This is the kind of accounting that would make Bernie Madoff blush. And here we are, members of the United States Senate and House, getting ready to pass this. I don't understand it. And by the way, it's still a tax. Maybe it's a tax on different banks, but it's still a tax. It's a tax that ultimately is going to lead to less credit, more expensive credit, and fewer jobs. That's what this is all about. I yield back the balance of my time.
Further debate on the question, gentlewoman from Illinois.